The Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Planted with Sara Pion. I'm Sara Pion, your host, and today we are going to Chicago to talk with Kris Walker, the President and Chief Commercial Officer of Hoodie, which is an analytics company, cannabis sales intelligence platform. Kris, welcome to the show. I'm so glad to have you here today.
I am thrilled to be here, Sara. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So are you in Chicago proper, or are you in the Chicago area?
I am in the Chicago area. I'm in an area right now, unfortunately, that was publicized. It's Highland Park.
Oh, okay.
So I'm in the northern burbs. I live in the Ravinia area, but yeah, in Highland Park.
Okay, yeah, I've had family in Evanston and also in Lake Forest, but my cousin I used to visit as a kid lived on Chestnut, like right next to where the Crate and Barrel used to be.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I know where the Crate and Barrel used to be. I've been here about 10 years, but it's a great part of the world. Close to the lake, and a nice diverse community, and it's a good spot in the world.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I miss the Great Lakes. The Crate and Barrel was like right by Water Tower Place. Where were you before you were in Chicago?
I was in sunny Australia, actually. So I was in Australia and New Zealand for about the 8 years prior to relocating here.
Oh, that's cool. I actually had somebody from Australia who's doing a lot of work in cannabis come visit a few years ago when I was co-chair of the San Francisco Legalization Task Force, and I took him to some meetings with me so that they could see what we were doing, and he was like, whoa, and I keep seeing him doing things, and I have great hopes for cannabis in Australia in the future.
Yeah, I think it'll be here sooner than we think, and New Zealand as well. I know there's referendums that we're talking about right now.
That's
so
awesome.
I'm not as dialed into that area as I used to be, but yeah, it's another good part of the world.
Yeah. Do you like wine?
I do like wine. I'm more beer now, but I like wine. I drink a lot of wine in that part of the world.
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna say. 'Cause when I worked in consulting, I had a consultant that had spent a lot of quality time in Australia, and he was like, "You have no idea how good the wines are that they keep to themselves."
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's funny because like I had I'm a very good friend who's he's a wine aficionado and very common on the speaking circuit in the alcohol space in Australia. And so I would often have dinner with him, and he'd just bring these amazing wines. And so I got at least somewhat dangerous with my ability to pick great Australian and New Zealand wines. And then I come back to the States, and I'm going to Benny's, the local liquor store here, looking on the shelf, and I'm like, man, I don't know any. There's so much wine here that I have no idea about. I'm sure these are some great California Chardonnays, but I've only been drinking like Australian, New Zealand wines for like 8 years. So I felt like a kid again.
Well, if you come out to California, my husband Jeff and I, we love wine, and we have a lot of winemaker friends. So
nice.
We'll although I'm sure that you can become well versed on your own, we could have some really good experiences with some wine, have a lot to talk about.
That sounds amazing. Let's do it. Yeah.
Right on. Also, one thing I was thinking about when we were talking about that in Australia is as things start to loosen up, just like in California here, I'm wondering how many conversations are going to start having about appellations and terroir. That could be some really cool stuff.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I mean, you're fully aligned.
Yeah. So I always like to start with a question for my guests, and I always say, if you're comfortable talking about it, but what was your first cannabis experience?
I'll start with my consumption experience, because my first experience is a friend of mine who I got a lift with back to school, and I was wondering why he was driving so slow the whole time. And anyway, it turns out that he had partaken way too much before picking me up, and so that was really my first entree, and it was a little bit of an odd experience, but anyway, we made it there safely and under control, and but it was. I went to school in Virginia, and I had quite a few friends that I hung out with, who were very everyday users, and so they did introduce it to me, and I don't know that I've got a memorable like single moment where it hit, because it was kind of a gradual thing as you're experimenting in college along with everything else you're doing in college, and I went along with it, and so I will say, and so that was kind of my journey into it, and and then honestly I traveled the world for a while, and and there's not a lot of availability in other places, as you might find here. So it's been kind of a rebirth into the space over the past 10 years and coming back to the country.
That's cool. Yeah, I definitely experimented with it and partook when I was in Michigan, but it was such a hush thing then. And moving to California, I ended up living in the Haight when I got here, and I was amazed when people would walk by and I'd get like this wafting cannabis smoke, and I was like, oh, wait, no one's getting busted. This is interesting. And now nobody cares.
Yeah. I know.
So what got you into the cannabis industry? Because when I was looking at your bio, I noticed that you've done work with Nielsen, and I'm just kind of wondering like how that all comes together, because we all get into this work in interesting ways. Like I love seeing the connects.
So it's truth be told, I stumbled into it somewhat. So I as you said, I was with Nielsen for many years, and I had a great experience with them, and I was able to travel the world and help lots of brands like Coca-Cola, Nestle, and Procter and Gamble, and Unilever, and all these real big brands, grow their business, leveraging data and technology, and so that was really what shaped me as a professional, and it's kind of what drove a passion in me in innovation. And while Nielsen's a big company, I had the fortune of really being able to drive a lot of the product development and the experimentation and work that they were doing out in Australia when I was there. And so, so I came back to the U.S. It's been about 10 years now, and I did some global roles with Nielsen for a few years before kind of going out and starting my own firm about 5 years ago. And the general goal that we had with that, it was called Big Chalk Analytics, and it's still a wonderful company, and it's doing great work today. But the goal with Big Chalk was to really help emerging brands and emerging channels develop out their CPG toolkit. And we obviously my background and my partners largely came from that world as well. And again, we had that experience of really leveraging data to help grow brands. And we, you could just see so much opportunity in it in these emerging spaces like direct to consumer businesses, and like an industry like cannabis, right? And so I was fortunate to get brought into an MSO that's based here in Chicago by a former colleague that I've worked together as one of my clients at Nielsen. And I remember going in my the first meeting, and I was talking to the CEO and a couple of the other executives about all of these amazing things that you can do with data and driving analytics and figuring out your pricing strategies and how you've got to measure every marketing expense that you're doing to figure out what's going to generate the greatest ROIs for you, and had all this fancy things. And the CEO was like, well, Kris, I love all that, but can we just start with just giving me a report of my from my markets, because I don't know how much money I'm making right now, because I've got businesses in all these different states under different systems, and I have no way of managing my business right now. So it was just kind of a wake up call to say, hey, we're we need to go back to basics, and and that was, but it was kind of the first meeting, and several years later, they were sold to another large MSO, and and we did some amazing things with with them to really help build out their technology strategy, and help them make a whole bunch of decisions that they may not have made otherwise, leveraging data and insights, and ultimately it was that initial entree into into cannabis through this company that made us realize that, hey, this is an industry that's really evolving very, very quickly. You've got some amazing talent and leaders that have come into this industry from places where they had data and they had tools like that we're familiar with, and that we can help bring to life for them. And so we I as a result of that, we kind of parlayed that into other cannabis brands and MSOs, and I've really been working almost exclusively in the space now for 3.5, 4 years. And it was again, it was an opportunistic move initially, but there's no turning back now, and we're super excited with with what we've been able to contribute to the industry as a result. So that's kind of how I got into it. There's an additional story about talking about the birth of Hoodie, but I can get into it later on in the conversation if you like.
I think now is a great time, because that was actually my next question.
All right. Well, there you go. So one of the things that we recognized pretty early on in our engagements with these cannabis MSOs is that they had a lot of great first-party data. They were able to, understand, I shouldn't say great, but they had a lot of first-party data. They needed a lot of help to kind of get it cleaned up and to be able to utilize it. But there was an abundance of data from their own dispensaries and their own sales into their, the accounts that they were calling on. But trying to really understand what was happening outside of the four walls of their business was very challenging. There were some other players in the space that were trying to provide some level of insight as to what the broader market trends were, but they tended to be at very high levels. The data was delivered, pretty far after it happened, and as a result of kind of the lack, and then in many cases that they didn't even exist for a bunch of states, and so as a result of that, it just wasn't very actionable. And so we kind of, and my background being with Nielsen, it was all about understanding what's happening in the market, what are the trends, what do we need to, how are we doing relative to our competition, and how can we obviously grow our market share and all this kind of good stuff. And and so just without having that rich market data available, there's something we were constantly on the lookout for. So fast forward, a couple of years into these engagements, and the whole world was hit with COVID, which is obviously a terrible thing. But one thing that COVID did do for the industry is that it basically forced every dispensary to move their businesses online in order to ensure that their customers continue to have an amazing shopping experience. And so so to survive, almost the smallest guys to the largest guys, all basically had to create these online storefronts which are basically mirror reflections of what was happening inside their four walls, and inside their dispensaries. And so, around that same time, I was introduced to, Wes Shepard, who's my co-founder. And Wes had spent, the past 5 years of his life basically building this amazing technology platform, which was great at basically going out and mining the e-commerce menus and e-commerce websites, and for large brands like Sony and Hasbro and these big brands globally, and so he'd go out and he'd capture all this data to help Sony and these companies figure out how their brands are being merchandised and priced and promoted on these e-commerce websites around the world, to allow, obviously manage that. So in order to achieve that, the platform had to be really exceptional, like grabbing that data and then obviously rapidly organizing it into useful information, which I'm simplifying it and dumbing it down here, but that's it's an impossible task, and that takes machine learning and artificial intelligence and all of these other fun big buzzwords to do. But Wes is a guru in the space, and it built this amazing platform. And so I had the opportunity when I met Wes, to basically a light bulb moment came off where we said, hey, the whole industry is now online, and you've got this amazing platform that can do these brilliant things. I bet there's a way that we could work together to really provide unique, actionable data about the market to the industry, and so we did exactly that. And so we shook hands and formed a partnership, and we spun off the cannabis practices for both of our companies and created what is now Hoodie Analytics. And we're now I don't know, year and change into the business, and we've been we can't be more pleased with the reception that we've had in the market. We're working with probably half of the MSOs that are out there and some of the most exciting brands, but also a whole bunch of emerging brands and emerging dispensaries that are just want to know what's happening at the couple dispensaries across the street from them. And it's been really fun to really provide what we feel is a best-in-class toolkit to cannabis, which is this exciting emerging industry, to allow operators and brands to be making data-driven decisions, in many cases for the first time. So that's the origin story for you, Sarah.
That's awesome. I mean, it's, you think about I've been in the industry now for a decade, and when I started, it was, people who were brokers or the growers themselves showing up with, their bags of cannabis, sitting down with the buyer, going through it, purchasing it. And you had, like you said, we knew what our inventory was, we knew what sold. But back then, the culture itself, people weren't talking to each other and sharing, what was working and what wasn't working. And I love that it's opening up more. And you brought up a point around the fact that there has been a definite lag in information with the data in the past. And one thing that I noticed, especially looking on LinkedIn, when people present old data as current news, and I'm like,
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting because I'm in the midst of it, and I know that's not necessarily so. When you're looking at that, you're basically doing how tight is the window for your data? How, if I was to pull a report on my business today, how old would the data be?
It's next day.
Next
It's
day.
next day. So yeah. So if you pull something this morning, it's reflective of what happened yesterday. So it's the very next day, which is, and that's, our mantra is all about actionability. We want to make sure that, data shouldn't exist for the purpose of admiring your performance, right? It should be there to empower you to make decisions. And so, you need to know that, if you're running a major brand, you need to know that 25% of your dispensaries just slashed your price by 30% yesterday. That's something you need to know. And candidly, you also need to know if your competitors just did it, because that's also going to impact your sales and your planning and everything else. And and it's all, in our world, it's very common for folks to say, hey, help me understand the ROI of your business and ROI of the investment in Hoodie. And, the nice thing about, the way that we're working is, and the data that we have, it's very easy to get that ROI, because every data point that we provide has a very specific action that can occur as a result of, being informed by that data. And that's it. Our world is all about actionability. And that's what I think really separates us from others in the space.
Yeah, it can be really difficult for people to determine ROI on their own because they don't necessarily understand all the components that come into it.
Agreed. And it's not it's funny. I answered this question as from one of our partners earlier today was it's a tough market out there, and so question was posed to me, is like, how's everyone reacting? And this short answer is there's many different ways that brands and dispensaries are reacting to the I'll call it tightening of the belt that's happening in many markets in cannabis right now. But one of the biggest things is the leadership is holding all of the business stakeholders much more accountable for ensuring that every dollar they spend, it has a payback. It has that ROI. And so, I was telling this gentleman I was talking to earlier today. I was like, I swear I've been asked about the ROI and the ROI stories for data more in the past 2 weeks than I have in like the last 6 months. It's but honestly, it's great. I love that from the industry because it's great discipline. It's like that's how you want to be working. You should not be spending money if you don't know what it's going to do for you and the action it's going to drive. And in our case, we're fortunate that we believe spending those dollars with Hoodie is going to give you a real ROI, and will allow you to do more with less. Will allow you to make better decisions. Will ultimately allow you to make more money. And so, that's. But I think that discipline is a good thing for the industry.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting because you think that we always talk about recession-proof industries. And as we know, it's like some people are announcing that we may be in a recession. People, we're in a recession. This is what's going on.
Yeah.
But it's like, cannabis in a perfect world would be recession-proof, except that we have all these other factors that are coming into play. We have policies that give us a disadvantage to other industries, especially with around, taxation and especially like business taxes, things like that. But then we also have, because we are a growing industry where in certain areas there is a lot of competition. So We're still kind of seeing, like I go back to like my org psych roots when I look at like storming, norming, and reforming, and we're definitely somewhere in there, depending where you are. But I could also see like the reporting not only being great for tightening that up, especially in times like these, not that it's not a necessity every day, because it certainly is, but also for newer companies or companies that are putting out products, but they're also still in the midst of development, like really seeing what's going on and also what the response is to what they put out already.
Yeah, completely. And that's the fun thing about it is like these newer emerging companies right now. And by the way, some of these newer emerging companies, they're being driven by some of the smartest people you'll ever meet, right? And they have made conscious decisions to say, this is the industry I want to be in. I've got a passion for the plant, and I've got a passion for the industry, and yet they are some amazing business people. And some of them, will come at this with I'll call it experimental mindset. They want to test everything that they're doing. And and that is a culture that does not exist across the space. So being able to really say, hey, everything I'm going to do it 3 times, because I'm going to test 3 different versions of this new product development, this new package design, this new way of marketing to my customers. And but there's plenty of research and and data that will show that those emerging companies that have really led with experimentation as a key pillar come out ahead in the end. And and that's and again, we're being selfish in the data business. Data is really the tool that allows them to understand the successes or the challenges with each one of those experimentations and the hypotheses that they're trying to prove.
Yeah, for sure. I know, like when we first started having people kind of reaching out and asking about data, I'm the public education officer for the Apothecarium, which is owned by TerraSend, which is an MSO.
Yep.
But back when we were just the Apoth, we would have people that'd be like, hey, we want to work with you. Give us your data. And it's like, data's money.
Yeah, it is.
But it's, what were you going to say?
No, I say that TerraSend are great. They're great folks, and they're great users of data as well. So I hopefully they're setting the Apoth in the right way.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, it's been very interesting, like growing up in the cannabis industry, like going from, a well-run mom and pop to, because it was family owned, to actually getting into something that's more of a corporate structure. And for me, it's not an unfamiliar thing, because my early years working, professionally was in corporate. I moved to civil rights later and then went into cannabis, kind of a fluke, much like, not the same kind of fluke that you had, but a fluke nonetheless. Because if you told me 12 years ago, I'd tell you were nuts. Working in cannabis. But we find the work that drives us in the strangest of ways. But it's a very interesting thing to see the growing of an industry and seeing all these talented people coming in that are like, oh, I have something to lend to this, and as this is developing, I'm seeing that this is missing, and the opportunity to innovate and change systems. And I honestly believe that, doing it right, we can change the way we do business across many platforms. Because I remember in the 90s when, technology was booming before that, but that was when we had the first .com boom. It changed a lot of the ways that we did business because it was so influential. And I think because of the cannabis industry growing in, there's so many states that if they aren't fully legalized, they at least have a medical program. Yeah. We're seeing a shift in commerce in the way we do business.
I completely agree. And I think the opportunities that come out of that for innovation are immense. And, and we are, one of the questions I often get is like, are there challenges with, with the cannabis industry because of its immaturity and its, and its fragmentation, and the answer to that certainly is like, yes, there are some challenges with everything, but the other side of it is it fuels innovation. Like, and because we are a newer industry, like the ability to power things through technology in our industry versus what, some of the legacy things that are still happening in places that have been around forever, like alcohol or CPG, like it's, you're actually able to bring transformative ways of doing business to the table, which, you couldn't dream about doing in some of these more well-established industries because of all of the legacy restrictions and rules and culture and ways of doing things that I think actually this industry provides, entrepreneurs the ability to really cut through and to do some special things. And again, I do find that in many ways we are a very technology focused, oriented business. I mean, again, I started, as I kind of was telling you our origin story earlier. I mean, the e-commerce, business and the way it's shopping online in cannabis right now versus any other industry, it's amazing. Even the smallest players have great, have the ability for you to have a great online experience and get things fulfilled and have, all of those orders directly integrated with your POS system, so it's there for you to pick up, immediately. Try to order your grocery stores from your local mom and pop retailer, and it's just not happening, and so there's some really cool things I think that, because of the fact that we did emerge later in the grand scheme of things, that have given, cannabis a technology advantage.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you also probably got to look at some of the things that people were using that didn't work quite as well. I mean, that's one of the things that I love about like working on the policy side is, I tell people like, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Let's look at what's worked and what hasn't worked and then overlay it with, what we think would be good, because there's it's moving so fast. I don't think anyone has the time or the patience to start from ground zero, although some people try. And, that just never seems to work out as well. But when we are looking at like leveraging data and insights, what are some of the important things that people should consider?
I would say, first and foremost, and I talked about it earlier, is, the actionability of the data. What are you going to do with the data itself? Like, you should not be buying data just to provide it to your boss so you can tell him if this business is going up or going down, right? Like, you should be buying data with a purpose. And it's, and you should know how that data can be landed in your business to help drive those actions that you're looking for. And like, so that would be number one, is just to make sure that the data assets or the information that you're bringing in, are there with a very specific purpose. And then, that you have a culture that's going to be able to take action as a result of that. So I mean, that would be number one. Number two is somewhat related, which is kind of just ensuring that you have a culture that is going to be, it's going to be able to actually make decisions based off of the data, right? So it's good that you have it. So you've got the best data in the world. It's very actionable, but now you have to put it in the hands of, in some cases, a 25-year-old bud tender, who previously had worked at a convenience store, and I know I'm not being fair to some amazing bud tenders out there with that analogy, but there are some that are very technology forward and are willing to go down a certain path. There are some that, they are incredible with relationships and institutional knowledge about the flower and strains and all of this kind of rich data. And, it's going to be important, for you to ensure that as a culture that you are having the metrics, and you're putting the metrics in place to allow your people to be making those data-driven decisions at the point where it matters. And those are probably the two sides. Like, one, just make sure you have that actionable data that's rich and that you can trust, and that, can be part of your business. And one of my favorite analogies is like, leveraging data or leveraging Hoodie should be just like taking a shower in the morning. It should just be part of your everyday life. It shouldn't be something you think about. But then the follow on to that is you've got to make sure that you've got the toolkit and the culture within your business to actually leverage that data, and that you're willing to put processes in place to make sure that happens. And again, and companies that do that are willing to invest and make that happen. They will be more successful. That's not a qualitative statement I'm making. There is gobs of data out there that show the incremental revenue and EBITDA that your business will achieve if you embrace data and technology and analytics in your decision making process. So those are the two things: actionability and culture.
Yeah, for sure. It seems like those coupled with, it's like there's that, like you said, everybody's going online. There's also that social media presence, which is a challenge, because we aren't federally legal yet. But it seems like in many ways, when we're looking at ROI, we're looking at SEO, we're, establishing ourselves, and not necessarily because of the constraints of what we can talk about, as more of like lifestyle brands and capturing people's imaginations. Like, I want to do that. I want to try that. I want to be that. I am that. And what are you seeing around, where do you see like the reporting that you do around ROI and things like SEO? Like, how do they work together in a way to create a more successful revenue model?
Well, I think the one thing that we are, and this is something that I don't think is done enough of right now, is to try to really start putting value on the elements of a brand that ultimately are going to compel someone to be willing to pay a bit more for it, to drive a bit further to get it, right, and to be recommending it to others. And in the CPG world, all of that can be pulled together into a concept called brand equity, right? I want to build my brand such that its brand equity is going to ultimately command me that higher margin, and ultimately it's going to grow my business, and then I can build innovations and things off of that. And I think that concept is where those worlds are going to start colliding, right? Like, we need to, as an industry, figure out our whole brand building process and to figure out how we can really start creating that differentiation of an eighth of cannabis or an eighth of flower that's gonna that someone would be buying, be willing to pay $30 for, versus the eighth of flower that someone might be willing to pay $130 for. And that's starting to happen, but kind of decomposing the elements that would be that would cause a customer to be willing to do that. and into some sort of a formula or a system, I think is going to be, one of the paths that people are going to follow. And I mean, the fun example that I've used quite a few times in, with talking about brand is, and you look at candles as a simple example, and you can get a candle at Walmart for 99 cents. That same candle is available at Bed Bath & Beyond for $14.99. And then you can get a candle off of Etsy that smells like Disneyland, and it costs you $59.99. And it's the same candle, right? But it's the experience, right? I'm going to be willing to spend $60 for a candle that gives me the experience of Disneyland when I light it up, right? And so where is that opportunity for us in cannabis? And can we capture that? Can we measure that? Can we track it? And start to figuring out, what consumers are looking for that are going to drive those new innovations that will command those premiums, and then figuring, and then obviously, from a targeting side, all the marketers are going to need to figure out how do I get them. So, things that you want, you might pay $130 for an eighth might be different than what, your neighbor would be willing to pay $130 for an eighth for. And so, so that whole process of creating segmentation and applying that segmentation to every part of the way you're doing business, so I know that if my product is in this dispensary, they have these kinds of consumers, and they're going to sell a lot of this $130 eighth because, these consumers are looking for this specific attribute and they shop at that store. And then you need to be able to reach them through marketing channels. And so that's where this whole concept of consumer behavior is going to become, I think, very rich and relevant in this space.
Yeah, I agree. It's really interesting to be able to just see how much everything has grown, and also like taking into consideration that what people used to perceive the average cannabis user as being is very different than the reality. Like, I had no idea when I started working in the dispensary. It's like people will, they still talk about, they're like, oh, seniors are like the largest growing market of cannabis users, and I'm like, that's bullshit. I saw so many gray hairs when I first started. It blew me away. But it's, when I teach my seniors in cannabis class, I always tell them, I pull up the myths, and one of the myths is that they're the largest growing group. And I'm like, some of you may not have used it, but you definitely knew somebody who did. A lot of you grew up in the 60s, and you all existed during the time of the war on drugs. So you weren't telling anyone your business. And usually I get a lot of grins when I'm like, you may not have tried it. It may not have been your cup of tea, but it wasn't that you didn't know it existed. And you've definitely been around it. But it also, just looking at like different markets and different things that are available. Like when I teach, I get people from all over the world attending. But, the majority of the people are in the United States and in Canada. And one of the things that people always say to me, because when I'm using product examples, I'm using California products. And some of these things aren't allowed in other states. And when I travel and I do lectures on education and policy, one of the things that I talk to policymakers about, because it seems like the modes of use, the way they decide what's allowed and what's not allowed, is very arbitrary, and it's based on stigma and culture rather than fact. And talking about, we need all these different ways to use it because our bodies metabolize them different. We all metabolize cannabis differently. So there's going to be a different product that creates a good fit for each person. And then there's that conversation about some people just, cannabis just is not for them. And that's a reality, and that's okay. But when you're seeing, like, when you're looking at the data and you're looking, I know you see a lot of different states, and you're in Canada as well. What are you seeing in different markets that you find interesting as far as like growth with like different products, modes of use?
That's a good question.
And I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot, Kris, so
No, that's right. That's right. I mean, listen, I mean, at its core, there obviously are very different, there are different, if I look at market shares of different categories of formats, by state, they're all over the board. And to your point, a lot of that does come from just regulatory history. Edibles are not very big in Pennsylvania because they are not allowed, and so, so you have a lot of the regulatory decisions that are driving the differences in modality. And I honestly, I don't have a great answer for this, but I do think that's still, I think your thesis is probably correct. And a lot of that has come from just the nature of, what was easy to make, the specific brands and MSOs that kind of drove the initial adoption in the market, as opposed to like a consumer-driven, consumer-driven pull of formats and modalities. The thing that does fascinate me right now and my team is less around the individual products and formats and differences by state, because again, those are there. It's important to look at, but I think a lot of them still just are driven by the history and the legacy in the space. Somewhat less so in things like looking at pricing, right? And and so one of the things that we've been looking at recently is just the differences in price points of an eighth of flower, within a given market, across states. There's huge swings, right? It's a lot of that's, certainly from the availability of, the different tax regulations and the cost that exists for, in a given market based off the licensing costs that might exist in one state versus another, and the cost to actually produce. So there's some legitimate, differences that are driving price, but the swings are significant enough, right, that it does, it's why these illicit markets continue to exist and thrive, because the price gaps are so significant right now. And I think that's something that it's going to be interesting to continue to monitor, because I do think there is going to be a point in the future where taking product from one state to another is possible and encouraged, and we're going to start seeing that commonality of pricing happen in the same way that it has with every other industry. And but right now, the differences in price do drive very different purchase behaviors for consumers. If you've only got a couple $100 to spend on cannabis for the next month, your choice is going to be limited based off of what is possible for you to buy with that $200. And that's something that I think we will start to see come to a head as more regulations are removed, and we come closer to a world where things can be shifted across states more easily.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see what interstate commerce does. I'm also wondering, one of the things that I always think about too, because we saw this when we went into adult use in California, was when all of the excise tax and all the cultivation tax and all that got thrown in. And so people I've been working with for years, their purchasing habits definitely changed, especially if they, because these were people that were also using it medicinally. So they're like, okay, well, I have needs and I've got to stretch this to see, what's going on. But I wonder.
And your format changes too, right? Your format changes, so. Oh, sure. It's causing unnatural changes to what you may not be your preference, but to your point, to stretch this out further, I need to make some changes. Yeah.
Well, and then at that time, because we went from there was very, very few companies did packaged flour at that time.
Yeah.
And then everything was packaged, and that was when somebody would look at me and. Especially some of the companies like Candescent at that time the jar came in a large box with rolling papers, matches, and a hemp wick. And people would look at me, they'd be like, "Is this why it's so expensive?" No. It's only a small portion of why it's become more expensive.
Yeah.
Let me give you a little Stoner Civics 101. How do we come to a certain price?
Yeah.
And then I've also been surprised too, because we have people who have been established in this industry for a very long time, but we often forget that when we have our own interests, and as human beings, we see things through a certain lens. So like
Yep.
when cannabis drinks were starting to get a little bit more popular, because back in the day, 215 days, a lot of the drinks were really gross. So,
Yep.
it was like really holding your nose and taking your medicine. So they weren't as popular. Some people liked them, but by and large, you weren't seeing as many people biting at that. But now with, nano emulsions and just like all the
Yep.
creativity that goes into it, I remember talking about, how I was excited to see people trying it, and somebody else who's been in the industry, I think he's been in a little longer than I have, but he was just like, I'm really surprised to see you into that, because it's low dosage and I don't think it's going to go. I think it's going to be a joke. And I was like, but what you're forgetting is that you're considering the population that you interact with every day. And yeah, if somebody's more of a heady, they're probably not going to be picking up a canned beverage because they'll be able to drink that like Kool-Aid. But there's a
Yep.
whole other group of people that are becoming engaged with cannabis, and cannabis culture is not a singular thing now. It's very different, and I find that fascinating, especially then when the data comes out to like back it up. It's like, yeah, it's one of the bigger markets, especially when you're looking at people who, may either don't feel like drinking anymore, don't drink anymore, or choosing not to partake at that time, or just prefer to use cannabis, because that's kind of like, I love wine and stuff, but I'm definitely more of a cannabis person these days. And it's nice to have something that is in a format that's more social.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you're spot on with with beverages. Like I even look in my own circle. Like I've got plenty of buddies who are they're on milligram levels that I could not tolerate remotely every single day, and and they will very commonly have drinks available because it is a social thing, and and they know that people that are newer to the plant are it's more socially acceptable. They're more willing to give it a try, and and listen, there's different experiences obviously that come with each one of those, but it's not I think the social element and the comfort level of it being like having a glass of wine, and I could have a couple of these, I think is going to be key to really some new customers coming into the space. And I think that's what a lot of these beverage companies are counting on.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting. And then, it's like for every success with something like that, you get an unfortunate fail. Like a couple years ago, and I don't know if you remember seeing this, but there was a product called Cannabumps out for a while. And I was like,
what was it? I don't know this.
Oh,
what was it?
It was called Cannabumps, and it was powdered snortable THC.
Oh, geez.
It didn't last enough to pull the data, but I would love to see.
I don't even know how we would classify that. I'm thinking back to my data. I'm like, how is that classified? Is that a tincture? I don't know how we classify that.
I know, because it would be like, I mean, technically it's an inhalable.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
But I was like, oh no. That's going to be triggering for several people.
Yes, seriously.
But, you got to give them credit for innovating. They're just throwing something, against the wall and seeing if it sticks. But that's, I think, just like going back to the product, that's like, that must be a really good tool for using your data as well. It's just really seeing what resonates for people when people are considering developing products. Do you have people who will tap into your data when they're in that stage?
Oh yeah, big time. And and the other thing, I mean, so yes, so when you're looking at trends, like you can dissect and slice or dice your data to see, what's growing, what's not, are there some emerging flavors or terpenes or whatever that's really taking off. But the other thing is leveraging our data to really understand the success measures once you go to market, and again back to that experimental concept. You can have 3-4 different launches, with variations, and as long as you can track, the where you're sending that product, you can start seeing, are consumers searching for one versus another online, and then what are they actually acquiring? So, it's nice. Another nice thing about the space is it doesn't cost, once you have the license, it doesn't cost that much to put a new innovative product in the market. And, so the ability to kind of test and experiment, to figure that out is it's very much there. And we obviously do a lot of tracking of those new products. And one of the things that we're really good at is helping, allowing brands to let their customers know where they can find their new products. And so we've got a product locator. It's called askhoodie.com. So ASKHOODIE.com. And you can go on there, and basically it's a library of every product that exists in every dispensary around the country. And and it's updated every single day, so it's always fresh. A lot of our brands will kind of white label that platform to allow their product, their customers to go onto their sites and find immediately where they can find these new innovations. And so it's a great way of not only seeing what works, but also, if you're a brand, pushing traffic to your dispensary partners who are buying the product from you, just to make sure that you've got this avenue for success. And so anyway, it's one of the bigger use cases of our data that's happening right now.
That's very cool. I come back to our conversation. You were mentioning the fact that we have a very large traditional / illicit market. And, there are some very talented, cultivators and entrepreneurs that are in that space. But one of the biggest problems, especially here in California, is the high cost of entry into the legal market. Yep. And so we have, through the years, there have been some really strong, well thought out brands that are smaller that we've lost due to, constraints with cash flow and just not being able to keep up with, the regs that are constantly changing. I'm so glad I'm not a compliance person.
Yeah.
But
I cannot imagine anything worse.
Oh my gosh. It's like our compliance officer, I'm like, whatever you need. Whatever you need.
Yeah.
I want to make your life as easy as possible because I know you're dealing with it.
Yeah.
She's got the patience of a saint. But, when we're looking at like smaller companies and data, how affordable and accessible is it for smaller companies to be able to utilize these tools that, of course, MSOs have much more, access because they have, more cash flow?
So the short answer is our product is built to allow scaling up and, scaling down. So, if a small brand just wants, I won't name them on the cat, but there's a dispensary in the Upper Peninsula that we're talking about earlier, my
hometown.
They're great, right? And they've got great access to what's happening in the Upper Peninsula, right? And they don't necessarily care about what's happening in mainland Michigan and and the rest of the country.
We never cared what's happening in mainland Michigan.
Yeah. So, but I mean, that's an example of like, we can slice the world so it becomes very attainable and accessible for folks like that don't need to understand. They don't care what the newest products are being launched in Pennsylvania. They just want to know what's happening in the Upper Peninsula, and so it's everything we have can scale up and scale down, and then I mean, like our product locators, stuff like that I mentioned. I mean, we've got some very small brands, and spending a couple $100 a month on something like that, and so and at the end of the day, as we mentioned earlier, it's all about ROI, and and there is a cost of accessing the data. No matter if you're big or small, if you want access to every data point that we have across the entire country every single day, it's going to cost some money.
Right.
But again, if you're looking at what data you need to make these decisions that you have to make, chances are you're going to be able to partake in a very accessible price point that will allow you to start moving the needle and get great ROI for it. And, and again, the nice part, our little slogan that we tend to use is our goal is to be tracking every product and every dispensary in every state every single day. And, and so with that level of granularity, we can piecemeal out the bits of data that are relevant for your business and, allow you to still, move in that data-driven decision direction, but without having to buy the entire country, or the entire state even.
That's awesome. I was just thinking, it's like I have a great love for my home state as a whole. After being away, I'm always curious to see if they're doing the Lower Peninsula and the Upper Peninsula. But it's when we talk about culture, I mean, there's a real example of same state, very different cultures. Uber culture is very different than Lower Michigan. They don't really care what the city folks are doing down there. They got their own stuff going on. But then again, I remember when I was going to school at NMU, we would have people who would come from Lower Peninsula, and they would spend fall semester with us, couldn't hack the winter, never came back for the winter semester. It's a whole different way of life.
Oh, it is.
And I always loved it when they'd be like, I'm from Detroit, and I'd be like, you're from Sterling Heights. Shut it. So we're wrapping it up. When you're looking at the industry as a whole in the future, what are some of the things that you're the most excited about?
I am looking forward to just more continued evolution of the industry to realize that there is great data here that can arm our decision making. And and I think that is an evolution that we're going to continue to have. And I think in conjunction with that, I mean, there's a lot of players in the space that are, on the technology side of the world, that are really focused on trying to create easier data connections such that, everything becomes part of your system and the way that you're doing business. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. So, having the Hoodie data connect into a Leaf Trade or a Leaf Link and then have that connect into your e-commerce platform or your POS system, and having all of those connection points to take the burden of doing that integration and having to figure out what do I use from what part off of the hands or out of the hands of the operator, and to really put the data in more in an as needed and fit for purpose level, because the integrations are created. And I think you're going to start seeing a lot more of that. And then the third is we talked about this earlier, but I really believe that we're going to start moving towards a world of brand building. And back to my example of my Disneyland candle, what does that look like for cannabis, and and what are those things that are what are those innovations that are going to come in whatever shape and form they come in, that are going to be compelling people to be willing to pay a bit more, for a certain experience or for a certain feeling, or and so that's really where I see the world coming. And I think when we can get there, then we are going to start, being able to be much closer to, to a CPG, type of industry where, you've got a lot of strong delineation across brands. You've got super premium, you've got your premium, you've got your value, you've got your sub value, and there's money to be made across that entire value system. And, and ultimately that's that. And, then we're going to obviously see, hopefully with increased legalization, just more people coming into the space and moving them up that chain, and everyone's making more money. And I think that's where we're going. And I believe data and technology is going to be a key enabler to making that happen.
Yeah. Brand building creates conversations, normalization. I'm really excited to see 10 years from now where we're at, not only in the States, but internationally. It'll be really interesting to see interstate commerce, and then I'm really curious to see if we go beyond that. I
would love to see that. I keep my previous role was like very global, so I was traveling all over the world. And I will tell you, I can't wait for that world to open up again. So,
You're going to crunch those numbers with joy, aren't you?
I know. Yeah, my partner's in Portugal right now. I think he's knocking on some doors to see what he can do there, but we still got some work to do.
That's awesome. For people who want to stay in touch and follow you on social media or reach out for information, what's the best way for them to do that?
Check us out. A consumer site would be that askhoodie.com. I would encourage you to go out there and find the products that you need and you're looking for. And then, if you're looking for anything else, it's Hoodie Analytics. And it's just Hoodie, Hoodie, Analytics. And you can find us on our URL, our domain at hoodieanalytics.com, or hashtag Hoodie Analytics for any of your favorite social platforms.
Awesome. And for those of you listening, remember, Planted is twice a month, and you can find us on social media. We are Planted with Sara Payan on Facebook, on IG and Twitter. We are Planted with Sara. Our website is www.plantedwithsara.com. And of course, you can listen to any of our past episodes on our parent network, Radio Misfits Network, out of Chicago. Also, if you like an episode, share it, review it. We want to hear what you think. And if there's someone that you want to hear from on our show, this podcast is for you. So drop us a line. Let us know what you want to see, what you want to hear, and stay tuned for this fall for some really neat new surprises. Actually, we are in fall, but we're going to have some great surprises coming up. So stay tuned for that. Kris, thanks so much for being with me today. It was just a pleasure talking with you, and I'm really looking forward to continuing the conversation as the industry develops and seeing the exciting things that you're doing.
Hey, likewise, Sara, and going to take you up on that wine dinner that we're having next time I'm in California.
You have to. I'm in the Bay, so you just let me know.
Done.
Awesome. For everyone out there, it's a crazy world out there. Be good to each other, stay safe, and most importantly, stay curious. Until next time, Sara Payan signing out. Take care, everybody.